Nakh peoples are a group of historical and modern ethnic groups speaking Nakh languages and sharing certain cultural traits. In modern days, they reside almost completely in the eastern parts of North Caucasus, but historically, certain areas of the South Caucasus may have also been Nakh. The only healthy, living branch of the Nakh languages are now the Vanek languages, due to the extinction of other peoples. The only non-Vanek modern Nakh people are the Bats people in northeast Georgia, but they are largely assimilated and the language is highly endangered. Although the Vanek are only a branch of Nakh peoples, due to the present-day situation, where the only well-known Nakh-Vanek, the words Vanek and Nakh are frequently confused. Hence the word Vanek is frequently but mistakenly applied to historical non-Vanek peoples. History. The early history of the Nakh peoples has been tentatively reconstructed from linguistic analysis and archaeological evidence. 10,000–8,000 BCE migration of Nakh people to the slopes of the Caucasus from the Fertile Crescent. 6,000–4,000 BCE Neolithic Era Pottery is known to the region. Old settlements near Alayut and Magas, discovered in the modern times, revealed tools made out of stone. Stone axes, polished stones, stone knives, stones with holes drilled in them, clay dishes, etc. Settlements made out of clay bricks discovered in the plains. In the mountains there were discovered settlements made out of stone surrounded by walls, some of them dated back 8000 BC. 4000–3000 BCE. Use of the wheel, horseback riding, metalworks, dishes, armor, daggers, knives, arrow tips. The artifacts were found near Nasa Court, Mushichi, Yeibors, Abigu. 4th century BCE, 11th century CE. The mountain clans founded an association of clans called Urzukia, which survived into the early Middle Ages despite incursions by Khazars, Huns, Arabs, Persians, Mongols and others. The first mention of the name Urzuki, according to the writing of the Arab writer Ibn al-Faqian al-Baladzuri, falls into the first half of the 6th century, stating the construction of Chosroes and Nushirvanum in Urzukia, 12 gates and stone fortifications. Georgian source Kartla Skovriba clearly states that Urzuks paid tribute to the Khazars. Destruction of the Alania capital of Magas and Alan Confederacy of the Northern Caucasian Highlanders, nations, and tribes by Batu Khan. Magas was destroyed in the beginning of 1239 by the hordes of Batu Khan. Historically, Magas was located at approximately the same place on which the new capital of Ingushetia is now built. D.V. Zayat's 12th–15th centuries. The state of Sumzia was a union of Vanek tribes. They started a national struggle of liberation from the Golden Horde. After the Mongol invasion, Islam started its spread in the region. The spread of Islam seems to have started in the lowland part of the Vanek states at this time, associated with the advent of the Arabic language and Arabic writing. Inscriptions on monuments from this time, preserved in some Vanek villages, also testify to this. 13th–14th centuries. Independence wars against Tatar-Mongol hordes and army of Tamerlane. 17th century. Present. Ongoing struggle over the independence of Chechnya. Ingush remain less openly rebellious, but still have a particularly problematic conflict with the Ossets. Batspi and Kists are considered Georgians and a part of Georgia. Caucasian Amarmate architecture. Towers, a characteristic feature of Vanek architecture in the Middle Ages, rarely seen outside Chechnya and Ingushetia, was the Vanek Tower, a kind of multi-floor structure that was used for dwelling or defense. Nakh Tower architecture and construction techniques reached the peak in the 15th–17th centuries. Residential towers had 2 or 3 floors supported by a central pillar of stone blocks, and were topped with a flat shale roofing. These towers have been compared to the prehistoric mountain settlements dating back to 8000 BC. Military towers were 25 meter high or more, with 4 of 5 floors and a square base approximately 6 meters wide. Access to the second floor was through a ladder. The defenders fired at the enemy through loopholes, and the top of the tower had meshikal overhanging small balconies without a floor. These towers were usually crowned with pyramid-shaped roofing built in steps and topping with a sharpened capstone. Buildings combining the functions of residential and military towers were intermediate in size between the two types, and had loopholes and meshikals. Nakh towers used to be sparingly decorated with religious or good-wishing petrographs such as solar signs or depictions of the author's hands, animals, etc. Military towers often bore a Golgotha cross. Sanctuaries, temples and mosques. The Vanek pagan pantheon included a supreme god Dela and a goddess of fertility Tusholi. There were also phallic cults. A whole number of peculiar monuments, natural and artificial, served as shrines for ritual services. Vaneks chose mountains, lakes and some species of plants, pear trees in particular, for exercising rituals. These shrines were places for prayers and for the sacrifice of domestic animals. The most primitive shrines were low rectangular pillar-shaped stone structures with a niche for candles. These shrines were raised on the village outskirts and at the graveyards to protect both the living and the dead. Better known are shrines in the form of small houses topped with ridged step roofing, like Maatsil Sanctuary on Matlam Mountain near the town of Vladikavkaz. Such a large range of shrines belonging to, beginning from the 11th–12th century, Georgian Christian influence on the Nakh tribes are attested, for example, by the Tkaba church consecrated to St. Thomas in Asa Valley, and extant churches in Ingushetia. Islamic influence intensified in 18th and 19th centuries. Examples of Islamic architecture from that period are the tower-shaped mosques in the villages of Makajoy and Kamoy. Necropoles, burial vaults or crypts remained from the pagan period in the history of Vaneks, before they converted to Islam in the 16th century. They were built either a bit deepening into the ground or half underground and on the surface. The latter formed whole towns of the dead on the outskirts of the villages and reminded sanctuaries from the outside, with the dummy vaults constructed of overlapping stones. The deceased were placed on the special shelves in the crypts, in clothes and decorations and arms. The general Islamic rituals established burials with the further penetration of Islam inside the mountainous regions of Chechnya and Ingushetia. Stone steles, churches inscribed with prayers and epitaphs, began to be erected at the graves, and more prosperous mountaineers were honored with mausoleums after death. The Borgakash mausoleum, dating to the very beginning of the 15th century and built for a Nofi prince, is a good example of these. Agricultural structures. Lack of arable land in sufficient quantities in the mountainous areas forced Vaneks to use the territory of residence as efficiently as possible. They leveled the steep slopes, or organized terrace suitable for agriculture, on the barren rocky slopes of rocks, which are unsuitable for agriculture. Vaneks hew foundations for terraces. On carts harnessed donkeys and oxen, they brought black soil of the lowlands, and filled with it artificial terraces. For maximum harvest was organized by the entire irrigation system, which consisted of a small artificial stream canals connected with the mountain rivers. These canals were called tatol. They also built a small stone canals called apala, and quite small wooden troughs apari. Some scholars, notably I. Dikonov and S. Roston, proposed that Apala and Apari may correspond to Euro-Ocean irrigation canal name Pili and Huron Pili. Some irrigation structures were built also in lowlands, but they were less complicated. Language. Chechen Ingush economy in the Middle Ages. agriculture, animal husbandry, trade crafts, vehicles, arts and carriages made Vanek masters were highly valued in the region and beyond. Products of Vanek masters bought not only the Caucasian peoples, but also such excess power with an established industry like Russia. To support non-competitive domestic producers, Russia overlaid Vanek manufacturers of large fees. At this complaining Terek Cossacks in the letters to Russian government, despite the fact that they are a natural enemy of the tree. In 1722 the Russian army bought 616 vehicles for 1308 rubles, at a time when the annual salary of the governor of the three villages was only 50 rubles. Carpet weaving. Since ancient times, the Vaneks have been producing thin felt carpets called the stang. The Vanek rugs are distinguished by a peculiar pattern and high quality. Jacob Renegs, who visited the region in the 18th century, noticed that Chechen and Ingush women skillfully manufactured carpets and fringes. Ornament Vanek carpets were divided among themselves into different groups dependent on patterns. Carpet with colorful ornaments, rug with fringe, plain rug, without any decorations or ornaments, thick floor rugs, expensive wall carpet. Mythology. Only a few fragments of Vanek mythology have survived to modern times. These fragments consist of the names of deities personifying elements of animist ideas, Nasaga, cosmogonic tradition, remnants of stock breeding and land tilling, totemic beliefs and folk calendar, legends. The greatest samples of Nakh mythology are the legends of Parkamit Galanchurj Lake, the epic war of Kargalberry dwarves against Nakhs, Kezanoa Lake, and myths about how sun, moon and stars appeared. The Nakh myth of the legendary Parkamit being shackled on Mount Kazbek by god Sela because he has stolen heavenly fire from him shows some parallels with Greek myth of Prometheus and Georgian Emir army. The legendary war of Parkalberry dwarves against Nakhs can be compared to Greek Crane and Pygmies war by said Magam Tkashiev. The Golden Fleece myth seems to be bound to Nakh 11 years calendar tradition. In such a myth, ram skin was placed in an oak frame jar for 11 years and produced golden fleece named Dasha Urtal. Legend of Kozanim Lake. Legend has explicit parallels with biblical Sodom and Gomorrah and the Islamic Lot. The story tells us that once there was a very rich settlement at the place where now there is a lake. Despite the wealth, the people of the city were very greedy. Once god Dela sent his representatives in the guise of beggars to test people. They asked all residents to give them food, but residents of the city in response to abused and driven away, and only one poor family in the village shared with them the food. Legend has it that a poor family left a burnt bread for themselves and gave a piece of white bread for the guests. Leaving the house, the guests told the family that after some time has passed, behind the front door water will be collected in puddles, and when this happens they should gather the bare necessities, leave the home, and go to the mountains. Since poor families do not disobey and so did everything as they told to do by the guests, they told the rich of the impending disaster, and asked to follow them, but the greed would not allow them to leave their treasures. That the evening the family watched a terrible catastrophe. They saw the water cover the house along with those who remained. In memory of terrible events, Vaneks named the lake, Lake of Sorrow and Cruelty, Kezanoa Lake. Legend of Galanim Lake. Legend tells of an incident which occurred when two women decide to wash clothes in the purest water of the lake next to the settlement, which was the abode of Vanek's supreme deity Dela's daughter Tusholi. In continuation of story, insulted goddess punishes the offenders, turning them into stones. All the same goddess could not remain in distorted lake. She has turned into a mythical bull, and began to destroy the settlements located on the hillside. Disaster continued until the bull was tamed in the settlement located in place of New Galanchoge settlement. Vaneks found use for the tamed animal. With its help they plowed the fields. But unfortunately the next spring in the fields that were plowed by sacred animal began to appear springs. The water flooded the fields and turned them into a lake, and Tasha only again turned her face and settled into a new clean abode. Cosmology and Creation. In ancient Nakh cosmology, the universe was created by the supreme god Dela. Earth, created in 3 years, was 3 times larger than heavens and was propped up on the gigantic bull horns. The realm of the Vanek gods was over the clouds. Ishadila was the ruler of the subterranean world. Dili-Malki was larger than the realm of the human. It took 7 years to create it. Nakhs believed that when the sun sets in the west it goes to the netherworld and vice versa. Dili-Malki wasn't an evil realm of the dead or undead. It was almost similar to the upper world with some improvements in its social structures. There was no judgment in life after life. Dela-Malk was the sun god, playing a central role in religious celebrations. On the 25th of December, Nakhs celebrated Sun Festival in honor of the sun god's birthday. The names of stars and constellations were also connected to myths. Vanex knew Milky Way as the root of scattered straw. Great Bear is the 7 brothers. 7 stars meets 7 sons of the god of the universe TQA. In the English version of the legend Parkamit, 7 sons of TQA were punished by his wife Kennan for Helpmagal, stealing fire from TQA. She lifted them up into the air, far from land, that they have become the 7 stars. Gemini, Sirius, Betelgeuse and Procyon as tripod star, Orion as evening star, Capricornus as roofing towers, Venus depending on daytime as sunset star and sunrise star. The name of the planet is Dulbat. Neptune. Fairy tales. In Nakh fairy tales can be found people with supernatural abilities, magic artifacts, mythic animals as dragons and winged horses, and some journeys to another worlds and magic. In almost all the fairy tales, good triumphs over evil. There are legends of the origin of defecating, which came as a punishment for men's greed. Religion. In the Middle Ages, Vanek society felt a strong Byzantine influence that led to the adoption of Eastern Orthodox Christianity in some parts of the country. However, Christianity did not last long. After the devastation of the country by Tamerlane, Christianity was eroded and gradually the Chechens and Ingush returned to the native pagan beliefs. Islam began to spread on Nakh people's lands from 16th and 17th centuries. Vaneks are predominantly Muslim of the Shafi school of thought of Sunni Islam. The majority of Chechen and Ingush people are Muslim of the Shafi school. Kists are partly Sunni Muslims and Georgian Orthodox, when Bats approx. 3,000 people are Christian by right. Most Chechens are Qadiris, with a considerable Naqshbandi minority. There is also a tiny Salafi minority. The two main groups have often had divergent responses to events, and some historic Iranian influence in Chechnya and Azerbaijan, which the majority of Iranians follow Shia Islam. However, as is also the case with other Caucasian groups, such as the Georgians, Abkhaz, and Circassians, Islam did not wipe out all traces of the native religion. Many Chechens and Ingush even refer to the god of the Muslim religion as Dela, who is the head god of the original Nakh pantheon. The Nakh interpretation of Sharia often is more resemblant of the Adat than of Sharia as practiced in other Muslim countries, though some note note that this may actually be closer to the original intent in some ways. There is a common saying that Muhammad may have been an Arab, but Allah is Chechen for sure, emphasizing this attitude towards the restrictive Islam of the Middle East that is often imagined in the West as representing the behavior and culture of all Muslims. Despite syncretism, most Nakh peoples are often regarded as either Muslim people or as Orthodox Christian people. Nonetheless, worship of the original Pantheon, with the exception of Dela, for the most part has no modern continuity and was replaced by Islam. Despite some syncretism, there is considerable tension among Chechens about religion. This largely asserts itself in the conflict between the pan-Islamist Wahhabi Salafi creed, which vows to cleanse Islam of impurity and syncretism, and those who view the indigenous form as superior or otherwise as a national custom to be defended. Among the claimant governments for the land of Ichkeria, both the Western exiled Chechen Republic of Ichkeria and the Russian-installed Kadyrov regime are largely hostile to Wahhabism, Salafism, while the reaction of the Caucasus Emirate is considerably more positive, though still at times rather uncomfortable towards it. The Kadyrov government, meanwhile, opposes Wahhabism in name, but still rules Chechnya with a rather harsh interpretation of Sharia law, including banning of bareheaded women in public, mandatory Quran study in schools, the death penalty for suspected homosexuality, and so on. The exiled Chechen Republic of Ichkeria, meanwhile, has consistently stated both that the indigenous interpretation is a national trait and that Ichkeria should be a secular national state. And while Islam may certainly be a part of the Chechen identity at times, it is certainly neither a requirement nor more important than any other aspect. This attitude has been largely consistent. It is noted by many observers, Chechen, Russian and Western, that often, as seen in countries like Turkey and Albania, nationalist imagery, particularly the wolf, an animal viewed as symbolic of the Chechen nation, is given far more importance than religion. Social structure. Traditionally, Nakh peoples known as a society with a highly developed and complex clan system, in which individuals are united in family groups called TSA house. Several TSAs are part of the Gar branch or Nakh road. A group of Gars is turned into a Tiap. Tiap is a unit of tribal organization of Vanek people. Tapes has its own council of elders and unites people from the political, economic and military sides. All cases Tiaps left solely to the democratically elected representatives of houses i.e. TSA. Number of participants of Tiapankeli depends on number of houses. Most Tiaps made unions called Takum. Takum is a military economic and military political union. Tiaps. Takums governed by a board of representatives of Tiaps. Tiapankeli. Tiaps Council of Elders choose one or several people to submit the Tiap in Takumkeli. New Tiap were taken in Takums depending on its geographical location and depends on the harmonization of Takum Council elders. Joining a Takum depended on desire of the Tiap itself. No one could force Tiap to join a Takum. To address issues of national scale worked Mekskil, the People's Council. Representatives of the council were elected by each Takum council and had an enormous influence on the destiny of the people. Could start a war or prohibit any attack. Tiap prevent war, as it was forbidden Nakhs to fight against the Kabadian kings in the 14th century. Ostkoi's Takum was banned for their disobedience when they were going to completely destroy North Dagestan Vanek clans of Ork. For disobedience of its orders, Mekil could raise an army from all parts of Chechnya and Ingushetia. Mekil could gather in different places at different times. It was gathering in Terloimox and Akimosk's Galanchurch region. In Galanchurch still stands gigantic Mexkeli stone, around which Mexkeli members solved issues. All Vanek councils also bore responsibility and respect for law and order. The problem is not solved in Tiap Council could move to Tukam Council and further even to Mekil. That was called Mexkidikar, meaning to make a state matter, and bringing to Mexki. Mexkil name come from Nakh word mox, the state. On the top of the social structure stands nation, which is referred to in most Nakh languages something resembling calm political structure. Many observers, including Russians such as Leo Tolstoy, have been very impressed by the democratic nature of the indigenous Chechen governments prior to Russian conquest. According to Western ichrophile Tony Wood, the Vanek people, in particular the Chechens, could be described as one of the few nations in the world with an indigenous system highly resemblant of democracy. Even more interestingly, in the 19th century, a couple of Circassian tribes overthrew the traditional aristocracy and established a democratic, egalitarian society, with some adoptions from the Nakh system. Of course, this advance, which may have spread eventually to all of the Circassian tribes, was halted by the political state being annihilated by Russian conquest, a fate later shared by the rest of the Caucasus. It is notable especially that the Chechen and Ingush systems, as well as the system later adopted from them by some eastern Circassian tribes, is resemblant especially of the Western Democratic Republic. It has a central government with a legislative body, a body resemblant of an executive branch as well as a judicial branch. The Adat and other bodies have served as the constitution. The members to all three of the main national councils of the nation were, in fact, elected, making the inherent indigenous democracy of the Nakh peoples even more striking. During the Soviet Union period as well as currently during Ramzan Kadyrov's regime, the Taipei Council system has been heavily criticized by Russian governments and the puppet governments installed by Russia in Chechnya and Ingushetia, who view it as a destabilizing force and an obstacle to maintaining order. The claim is that such a system was illustrative of the anarchic nature of the Caucasian ethos, the democratic and egalitarian nature and democratic values of freedom and equality of Chechen society has been cited as many as a major reason why the persistence in resistance to Russian rule has been so intense. Foreign origin Tiaps. According to Nakh ethos and moral codes such as the Adat, hospitality is considered extremely important, less important only than freedom and equality. As the third most important value to the moral code, it has a profound effect on the functioning of the Tiap system. Several times, originally foreign groups have been completely integrated into the Tiap system, becoming their own Tiap. A notable example is the Germans who lived among the Chechens during their exile in Kazakhstan and Siberia. During even as short a period of 13 years, the Germans decided to join the Tiap system, and the new German Taipei was founded by M. Weissett, whose relatives still lived mainly in Germany. There have also been several periods where Jews living in Chechnya founded their own Tiap, which is still in existence, though it has shrunk considerably due to the flight of people from Chechnya due to the brutal war. There are also Tiaps that were formed, sometimes temporarily, by Russians, Poles or Ukrainians. These types are often eventually viewed as integral parts of the nation, despite their foreign origin. Genetics. Y-DNA Haplogroup J2A4B*. A 2011 study by Oleg Balanovsky and a number of other geneticists showed that the Y-DNA haplogroup J2A4B* was was highly associated with Nakh peoples. J2A4B* accounted for the majority of the Y chromosomes of Ingush and Chechen men, with the Ingush having a much higher percentage, 87.4%, than Chechens, who had 51 to 58% depending on region. In the paper, Balanovsky et al. Speculated that the differences between fraternal Caucasian populations may have arisen due to genetic drift, which would have had a greater effect among the Ingush than the Chechens due to the smaller population. The Chechens and Ingush have the highest frequencies of J2A4B* yet reported.